Wei Hao, do you think I'm afraid of you? You want to challenge me? You're just making trouble for yourself. Although Su Bai had spent quite some time hiding in the crowd, he seemed not at all humble in the face of Wei Hao's charge. Foul scoundrel. Just because I can't deal with Wang Chong doesn't mean that I can't deal with a brat like you. A vicious look appeared in Su Bai's eyes. What sort of person was Wei Hao? He was the butt of the jokes they made while messing around their punching bag in Eight Gods Pavilion. Su Bai had never been afraid of Wei Hao. And besides, Wang Chong had repressed Su Bai so much that his belly was almost bursting with rage. Boom! Su Bai thrust out a palm, his entire body suddenly going red. His dantian began to reverberate with the ringing of metal as a majestic energy burst out from his body. This was not the strength of the origin energy realm, but the stellar energy of the true martial realm. Although he seemed ignorant and incompetent, Su Bai had broken into the true martial realm a long time ago. As a member of one of the top-ranking noble clans in the empire, Su Bai couldn't actually be a true incompetent. Wei Hao, this time, I'll let you get a good taste of pain. Su Bai had a sinister gaze as his voice turned into a roar. But then suddenly, boom! A boundless power rang out with the clattering of metal as it smashed into Su Bai's hand. Like he had been struck by some massive mountain, Su Bai flew backward like a stray kite. As Su Bai flew backward, he brought the 7 or 8 people in his path down with him. Aya! Su Bai, you bastard! Don't you have eyes? What are you two doing? Fighting here? The orderly reception hall fell into chaos as those clan representatives knocked down by Su Bai began to curse. Wang Chong, shouldn't you be controlling Wei Hao? On the ground, Su Bai was both shocked and furious. He was shocked at Wei Hao's power and angry over the fact that he had shamed himself in front of so many people. Wei Hao, it's fine, that's enough. Wang Chong couldn't help but inwardly laugh. From the moment Wei Hao appeared, Wang Chong could sense that his strength had increased by leaps and bounds. The mountain ascension art had been an elite art back then, so it would have been stranger if Su Bai had won. However, he had not called on Su Bai so that he could humiliate him or take revenge. Such a matter wasn't even worth mentioning when compared to what he planned to do. Humph! Su Bai, weren't you mouthing off just now? Can't back it up? Heh! I'll let you go this time for Wang Chong's sake, but I won't go so easy next time, Wei Hao said with a huff. Now that Wang Chong had spoken, he naturally couldn't continue, but it was fine to give him a good tongue lashing. Su Bai's complexion fluctuated between green and purple, but to everyone's surprise, he didn't leave out of anger from his humiliation. Wang Chong, do those words of yours count? Do you really plan to exchange 3 months of one true martial realm expert's time for one wood steel weapon? Su Bai asked, staring at Wang Chong. He originally intended to not show himself. While he had outwardly agreed to listen to his father, he had actually wanted to make Wang Chong look like a fool. But it was no longer the time for that. Wood steel swords were the highest class of weapons. They were not only gorgeous, they were also incredibly tough, simultaneously almost invulnerable and incredibly sharp. Almost no saber or sword in the capital could compare to them. As a result, although every wood steel weapon was remarkable, they had always been priceless. The Duke Su residents had once attempted to buy a wood steel sword, but found out that the wood steel swords were only being circulated in the palace and were simply impossible to buy outside. In the past, Duke Su's status had meant that he had always been able to easily obtain any information or object he wanted from the Imperial Army. The situation in this case was completely different. The Imperial Army that had always been extremely respectful to the Dukes of the Empire had an attitude as different as night and day to the wood steel swords. Anyone who got their hands on a wood steel weapon wasn't willing to let it go. Ever since the wood steel weapons had started being auctioned off, the number of them that had appeared outside the Imperial Army could be counted on one's fingers. To the majority of the clans, this object was something they could look at, but not touch, could encounter, but not seek. More importantly, the clans of the capital all had a few precious swords that had been passed down through the generations, but the sharpness of the wood steel weapons far surpassed them. The price of such weapons was naturally impossible to estimate. Martial artists had a lifespan, but sabers and swords could be passed down without limit. This was where the value of Wu's steel weapons rested. If they only needed to lend one true martial realm tier 4 or 5 expert for 3 months to receive an indestructible Wu's steel sword that could slice through metal, this would be an incredibly profitable exchange. Right, young Master Wang. You can't just take back your words. A great clan also needs its dignity. Young Master wouldn't throw away the Wang clan's dignity for a Wu's steel sword. Right? 5 true martial realm experts is no problem. Young Master Wang, you'd better not go back on your word. That's right. That's right. It only took a few moments for the crowd to take a completely different tone and voice their approval. The conditions the Wang clan had offered were simply impossible to resist. No one had expected the terms to be so generous. Wait a moment. Wang Chong, don't do this. Bai Xiling was quite panicked over the fact that Wang Chong had made this sort of promise. Xiling, it's fine. Wang Chong smiled and waved his hand. After allaying Bai Xiling's worries, he turned to the crowd and announced, "Our Wang clan's words can naturally be counted on. And I'm also putting my reputation on the line here. On my end, I only have 1,000 Wu's steel weapons. After this wave, even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have any to give out. Thus, I'll stop as soon as I reach 1,000 true martial realm experts. Whether or not you can get a Wu's steel weapon will depend on yourselves." Boom! Wang Chong's words were like a boulder falling into the crowd, instantly causing them to rush out of the room. This matter involved a massive boon to the clan. Everyone was afraid to fall behind. "Su Bai, wait a moment," Wang Chong sternly called out. In the crowd, Su Bai, who had already run 7 or 8 zhang, suddenly came to a quivering halt. As he slowly turned around, he had an unsightly grimace on his face. "Wang Chong, are you going back on your word?" Though he truly had come to make trouble, he was also no fool. Exchanging 10 elite experts for 10 Wu's steel swords would be of massive benefit to the Dukesu residents. Only an imbecile wouldn't make such a deal. In comparison, the grudge between him and Wang Chong might as well not exist. If Wang Chong suddenly went back on his word, then he would be in trouble. "Humph, I'm not going that far." Wang Chong waved his sleeve and grinned. "But I presume that you also understand our relationship. So, Su Bai, don't think that you can send some people over, take the Wu's steel, and also make trouble for me in secret. I don't demand much of others. But for you, don't send any of your Su clan's trusted agents. And don't send anyone below true martial tier 6. In addition, I know that your Su clan recently recruited a new batch of experts. Shouldn't have been more than 2 months ago. This amount of time probably hasn't been enough for you to completely tame them, right? If you want to get some Wu's steel swords, you should know what to do, right?" Wang Chong indifferently said. Su Bai's face froze, his complexion ghastly pale. Wang Chong had been right on the mark. He really did have such plans. No matter what Wang Chong planned on doing, as long as he planted a few of the Su clan's trusted agents inside, he could obtain the sharp Wu's steel swords while also getting a grasp of Wang Chong's movements and secrets. If it was necessary, they could even stab Wang Chong in the back. If something really did happen, they could just say that they didn't know anything and push the responsibility on a few of their guards. Alas, Wang Chong had already prepared to defend himself against this move, and he even knew about the new batch of experts that the Su clan had recruited. "Humph! Wang Chong, don't get too smug. There will come a day that you'll regret this." Although Wang Chong had seen through his plans, Su Bai wasn't willing to give him the final word. After throwing out this phrase, Su Bai quickly departed. A matter involving Wu's steel weapons was no minor one. He had get back and tell his father as quickly as possible. "Wang Chong, why do you need so many people? And you're even exchanging them for Wu's steel weapons?" Once everyone had left, Zhao Yadong took a few steps forward and voiced the question on her mind. "Does it have to do with the Southwest?" It was still Bai Xiling who was the first to catch on. Wang Chong said nothing, only glanced at Bai Xiling and gave a deep nod. As those clan representatives left the Wang clan residence, the news that the Wang clan was exchanging Wu's steel swords for experts quickly spread through the capital. The entire capital began to quake. "Fuck! I knew I should have gone. It's over. It's over. It's all your fault. This was a chance dropped right in our laps. But it was lost all because you jabbered too much. Hurry up. Do you know how much effort the clan head wasted trying to get a Wuxia steel sword from the palace? And he still failed. Now the Wuxia steel weapons are being sent right to our doorstep. We can't miss out. I don't care how many experts the Wang clan wants from our clan. I don't even care if they die. We have to get those weapons. Quickly, gather the clan's experts. In addition, make preparations. I have to immediately pay a visit to young Master Wang. No matter what, I have to get a few spots. In the capital, the clans were in a flurry, many of them regretting their previous decisions. The matter of the Southwest had currently transfixed the entire capital, but the Southwest was very far away. In comparison, the exchange offered by young Master Wang was intimately related to the well-being of their clans. Countless clans quickly began to take action. And while the clans were beginning to gather the experts, all the thousands of sword shops and swordsmiths in the capital were also in a frenzy. For 100,000 taels of gold to buy out the production of your jade-cut sword shop for the next 3 months. This is the schematic. Forge the items according to the instructions. No mistakes are permitted. As the horse galloped away, a heavy bag of gold flew through the air, through the door of jade-cut sword shop, and thumped onto the floor of the reception hall. The impact of the bag was so great that the entire sword shop quivered. For 100,000 taels? In just a few moments, the people inside the building came out and stared in shock at the heavy bag on the floor. Jade cleave shop, jade steel shop, rending metal smithy. On the same day, all the famous sword shops and smiths of the capital received Wang Chong's generous reward. Both sword shops and swordsmiths were actually extremely limited in the amount of profit they could make each month. Unlike Wang Chong, they couldn't make just one sword that would then sell for tens of thousands, 100,000, or even hundreds of thousands of gold taels. In truth, in the entire capital, probably only Wang Chong was capable of such a feat. 400,000 taels already far surpassed the yearly revenue of these top-notch swordsmiths and sword shops. Though they had initially been hesitant, how could they remain so after Wang Chong delivered all this gold to their doorsteps? In this short span of time, all the sword shops and swordsmiths made their decision. In practically one day, Wang Chong had gained the ability to decide what all the sword shops and swordsmiths in the capital could forge. Starting from now, Wang Chong had exclusive use of these sword shops and smiths. They would only make items for Wang Chong, would serve only him, would give him all they produced. Such a thing was unprecedented. But now, it had all become reality. Through the use of gold and the Wuxia steel weapons, the entire capital began to operate around Wang Chong and the Wang clan like some massive machine. Thick smoke poured out from various places in the capital as the sword shops and swordsmiths closed their doors to other customers and began to forge weapons for the same person. And the clans of the capital were dispatching their experts to the Wang clan. Wang Chong gave Li Sai, Wei Anfang, and Zhao Jingdian the responsibility of handling these experts. Strength was not the only thing needed to make guards and experts from the great clans into soldiers that could work together and crisscross the battlefield. Strict training was also necessary. However, unlike hired experts, the experts and guards from the clans had at least some military experience. It was for this reason that Wang Chong had prioritized gathering guards from the great clans first. Everything has been set in motion. All that's left is myself. Wang Chong stood on a high pavilion, the gusting winds ruffling his robes. Surveying the tiled roofs and towers of the capital, he saw columns of smoke floating into the sky while the sounds of hammering could be heard from every direction. And in the distance, he could hear the neighing of war horses. Wang Chong felt like he could see the hundreds of guards training in the distant deflecting blade manor under the direction of Li Sai and Zhao Jingdian. War had always been an enormously expensive venture. Whether in manpower, food, or war implements, it put forth costs that no ordinary clan could bear. Wang Chong had already invested everything he could, including the Wuxia steel swords and the money he had gotten from auctioning off the spirit vein. The gears were already beginning to spin. Wang Chong was deeply aware that what awaited him next was a gruesome war. It wasn't only the soldiers that needed to prepare for this war. He had to as well. With a thought, Wang Chong immediately communicated with the Stone of Destiny in his mind. When he had attempted to kill Yaluishan and killed Ashina Sugan, he had obtained 200 points of destiny energy. With the addition of the destiny energy he had gained from killing the Yuzhou soldiers, he had accumulated a total of 269 points. He could have left this destiny energy for when the next level of rewards in the Stone of Destiny opened, but the campaign in the southwest was imminent. He no longer had the time. Only by making the exchange now would it be of any help in this war that was about to begin. Moreover, although the first level of rewards wouldn't be as impressive as the next layer, Wang Chong knew that one of the rewards would be of great assistance to him. Stone of Destiny. Exchange for 3 stellar energy piercers. Wang Chong sent this thought into his mind. Rumble. His mind brightened, golden light bursting out as the energy of 3 stellar energy piercers came out of the Stone of Destiny and flew into Wang Chong's dantian. BZZT. Wang Chong's already formidable energy quickly increased as the 1 stellar energy piercer suddenly became 4. The chance of the stellar energy piercer activating also raised from 5% to 20%. With every 5 attacks, there was a chance of 1 piercing through stellar energy. After exchanging for 3 stellar energy piercers, Wang Chong also rose in power, going from True Martial Realm Tier 3 to the brink of True Martial Realm Tier 4. I'm only missing out on that last step. With this thought, Wang Chong opened his eyes and turned to look at the 4 pills in his hand. He had gotten these pills from Six-Fingered Zhang. Money can make even ghosts push the millstone. The selling of the spirit vein had granted Wang Chong an enormous sum of money, simultaneously raising Wang Chong's status in the hearts of the palace alchemists. This time, it was the palace alchemists who had come to find Wang Chong, taking the initiative to increase his privileges. The number of pills he could exchange for each month had been raised by 1. Gulp. Wang Chong raised his neck as he swallowed the 4 pills. For a moment, it felt like fire was running through his veins, but after a few moments, the pills were expended, and Wang Chong had successfully broken into True Martial Tier 4. Boom! Thunder crackled over the distant west. A massive city loomed over this vast land, and above the city, black clouds gathered, with silver snakes of lightning shuttling through them. Across from the city was a land that reached into the clouds. It felt like a massive wave that could slam down at any moment and wipe everything away. This was the Tibetan Plateau. The distant Longxi felt the threat of this land, the threat of this empire, more than any other part of the Central Plains. Although they were neighbors, this lofty plateau was like another world to the Central Plains. Those highlands nurtured countless warriors. Even though dynasty after dynasty of the Central Plains had defeated them, they had never been able to completely destroy the threat. The high altitudes were like an invisible barrier that made it difficult for the empires of the Central Plains to fully utilize their strength. Time after time, the cavalry would gather on that plateau and charge down into the Central Plains, plundering and killing. Then, before the army could arrive, they would retreat back into the Tibetan Plateau. To the people of Yusang on the plateau, the Central Plains were defenseless, until that city was built and that person appeared. Big Dipper City. Gashuhan. This newly constructed city was like a gigantic nail hammered into the western border. It was an existence that held down Longxi and suppressed the cavalry of the Yusang Empire. And great General Gashuhan, who had risen like a comet, had swept over the western border, becoming the Yusang Empire's most feared existence. When the 7 stars of the Big Dipper shine up high, Gashu comes at night with his saber. No prying shepherd or horse dares to cross Lin Tao. This folk song was not only known in Longxi, but also in the Tibetan Plateau. Everyone knew of it, and everyone trembled in fear at it. And it was precisely Gashu Han's existence and the nail of Big Dipper City that led to the extremely famous saying, "The world is rich and populous, but nowhere surpasses Long Yu One." Amidst the peals of thunder and the low clouds, fierce neighing tore through the sky. It had come from above the clouds, from the top of that towering plateau. It took only a few moments for a dark and bloodthirsty figure to appear at the edge of the plateau, and on that figure's back was a large banner flapping in the wind. Enemy! Almost as soon as that figure appeared, a lookout on the walls of Big Dipper City gave a loud shout of warning. Over the many years spent guarding Longxi's border, These soldiers had become extremely familiar with Yusang cavalry. That armor of theirs was so heavy that it seemed to sink into their bodies. Even from a distance, they were very easy to recognize. But this was not the cause of his concern. Ever since their great general had established Big Dipper City, the Yusang Empire had been dealt defeat after defeat. It had been a long time since any of them dared to engage in a frontal assault under the eyes of Big Dipper City. Such circumstances were extremely unusual. Boom! The entirety of Big Dipper City came to life, thousands of soldiers surging out and swiftly forming ranks. Despite their numbers, there was no sense of panic in Big Dipper City. Even when they were rushing to their posts, they still followed a strict discipline and order. It only took a few moments for the massive Big Dipper City to fall silent once more. All the soldiers were standing ready at their positions, an intimidating aura hanging in the air. The city was so quiet that it seemed to be empty. At this moment, the long hours of training in the Big Dipper Army were on full display. It had only taken a few seconds for the entire city to break out of its normal routine and enter a battle-ready state. But though the city was quiet, outside the city, it was getting louder and louder. Rumble. A massive sound like the raging of the sea came from the high plateau. Although it had started soft and almost inaudible, it had gradually become louder and louder, resounding through the air. By the time it was close, everyone could hear the thousands of horse hooves pounding the earth, mixed with the clattering of armor. It's the Yusang army. On the city wall, the Big Dipper army soldiers began to pale. They had stood sentinel in Longxi for many years, so they were used to fighting with Yusang. But there was clearly something different about this battle. From the ferocity of the gallop, the army that had appeared on the Tibetan plateau far surpassed those of the past. The quaking of the earth meant that this army consisted of at least 100,000 soldiers. "Look over there," somebody shouted and pointed. Under countless eyes, a massive banner, perhaps 100 feet tall, suddenly unfurled itself at the edge of the plateau. This banner flapping in the wind seemed to have been dyed with blood, and on this bloody background was a massive three-headed white lion, its teeth bared. Even at these distances, it was possible to see it clearly. The three-headed white lion banner. It's Witadra Konglo too. The soldiers paled even further, and even the officers of the Big Dipper army began to appear nervous. Not many people had ever seen the banner of the three-headed white lion on the Longxi border, but there was practically no one who didn't know what it was. It represented a legendary existence of the Yusang Empire. The Tsenpo's king of generals, the Yusang war god, Witadra Konglo. In Yusang, this person's status far surpassed other great generals like Huashu Huaitsong or Dusong Mangpoch. His status was similar to that of the great Tang's war god. Now the crown prince's junior guardian, Wang Zhongxi. At the time, Wang Zhongxi had lorded over the west, almost fighting his way onto the Tibetan plateau, where he could menace the royal city of Yusang. In the end, he failed because he had encountered Witadra Konglo. And across all the Yusang Empire, the only person that could be a match for war god Wang Zhongxi was Witadra Konglo. The legends said that this man's ability to command was almost divine. But ever since that war, Witadra Konglo had never appeared again. No one had expected this legend of Yusang to appear now. In an instant, all the soldiers of the Big Dipper army turned to look in one direction. A man's name, a tree's shadow. This legendary king of generals was far too famous, exerted far too much pressure. If there was one person in Big Dipper City that could stand against him, it could only be their great general. Everyone looked toward the highest tower of Big Dipper City, waiting for that mighty figure to appear. When the 7 stars of the Big Dipper shone up high, Geshu came at night with his saber. No matter the time, the Big Dipper Great General Geshu Han's name would be in existence as firm as the mountains and rivers in the west. Witadra Konglo. Geshu Han stood in that majestic tower. Though he was not striking any particular posture, he exuded the aura of a mountain, of steel that had gone through countless temperings. Though an imperial great general, Geshu Han had a handsome appearance and dignified bearing. When those long and narrow eyes opened, they were as bright as the sun or moon. Although they showed no anger, they gave off a majesty that inspired awe and respect. As a former subordinate of the great Tang war god Wang Zhongxi, Gushu Han had experienced many things, including the great battle between Wang Zhongxi and the White Lion Great General Wi Tadra Konglo. Yu Sang came away from that war with heavy injuries, and Wang Zhongxi, affected by the geography of the plateau, the limits of his soldiers, and Wi Tadra Konglo's resistance, also chose to withdraw from the Tibetan plateau. Gushu Han had personally taken part in the war, so he clearly understood what had happened back then. Only Gushu Han knew that it was not out of kindness that Wi Tadra Konglo did not continue to invade the Central Plains after that war. In fact, he had suffered severe injuries back then that forced him to retreat. But after so many years, his injuries should have mostly recovered. In abnormal circumstances, there must be an evildoer at work. It has been a long time since Yu Sang and the Great Tang engaged in any wars. What does Wi Tadra Konglo intend to do by showing up here? The black-armored Gushu Han stood unmoving on the tower, allowing the wind to throw his long hair about. He had experienced many campaigns of all shapes and sizes, so there were very few things that could affect his mood. But at this moment, Gushu Han felt a little uneasy. It was not because of Wi Tadra Konglo, but because Yu Sang's movements were too out of the ordinary. It was true that Wi Tadra Konglo was the White Lion Great General, the greatest of all of Yu Sang's great generals and the most powerful. Even war god Wang Zhongxi at his peak couldn't do much against him. But Gushu Han was not going to subdue Yu Sang. A campaign in the open and defending a city were two different things. The cavalry of Yu Sang might be fierce and courageous, but as long as the Big Dipper army didn't engage them on open ground, the White Lion Great General Wi Tadra Konglo could only twiddle his thumbs. After so many years, it was impossible to keep track of the number of Tibetans the Big Dipper army had killed. If there was one group of soldiers who had the greatest understanding of Tibetans and were most effective against them, it could only be Gushu Han's Big Dipper army. Forged in fire and blood, this army could stand on its own 2 feet and face any storm. This was not an army that could just be run over. Gushu Han was confident that the Tibetans understood this simple principle. Wi Tadra Konglo would never do anything without a purpose. If the White Lion Great General did not possess an unusual intelligence, he would have never been able to block Wang Zhongxi's attacks. Gushu Han stood on the tower as his mind worked, countless thoughts flashing through his mind in the space of a few seconds. The entirety of the empire, including the landscape of Longxi, flitted through his mind. Lintao stood on the border of Longxi, and with Big Dipper City towering here, the Tibetans had essentially no chance of getting past. As for the northwest, Gao Shenji was standing sentinel at Suiye. He also had Feng Chongqing's help, and with those two individuals, one the master of martial matters and the other the master of civil, not even the White Lion Great General would be able to do much. As for Qixi, Fuming Lingcha was standing guard. This person was an out-and-out veteran. When he was standing guard over the western regions, he had fought with Tibetans quite a few times. He had even pushed back the Arabs before. In truth, if one looked at a map of the empire, one would discover that from the ends of the western regions to Suiye, from Qixi to Longxi, 3 protectorates of the Great Tang had formed a curved wall of steel along the Tibetan plateau, sealing the Tibetans within. Meanwhile, and Sichuan's biting protectorate was intimidating the eastern and western Turkic khaganates. Given his massive army, he could come to the aid of any of the other 3 protectorates at any time. The Tibetans would find no chance for progress here, not unless Xianxia in the southwest. With this lightning bolt of a thought, Gushu Han's entire body shook. He suddenly understood something and his face morphed into a nasty grimace. The only path the Central Plains had left for the Tibetans was Xianxia in the southwest. It was already no secret that Shenyu Zhongtong and the 180,000 Great Tang elites had lost to Zheluofeng. But Gushu Han had always believed that even if Shenyu Zhongtong lost, he would only suffer a few losses. Given the strength of the Tang soldiers, as long as they stood firm, their own strength and the reinforcements coming from behind them were still completely capable of defeating Zheluofeng. But at this moment, Gushu Han felt an extremely ill omen. Boom! While Gushu Han's brows were rising in unease, the low, desolate, and grandiose sound of a horn came from the towering plateau. Beneath that bloody banner of the 3-headed white lion, A smaller black banner was propped up, and on this black war banner was the striking image of a glaring black yak. Two banners, one red and one black, one big and one small, stood together. Even Geshu Han paled at the sight of these two banners. Anyone who had lived in Longxi for some time could recognize that black banner as the banner of Yusang Great General Dusong Mangpoch. Two Yusang Great Generals had appeared on the border of the Tibetan Plateau to threaten Longxi. Even Geshu Han began to feel a mighty pressure on his shoulders. For any empire, a great general played a critical role and would rarely appear. For two Yusang Great Generals to appear at the same time and face down Big Dipper City was completely unprecedented. Not only Geshu Han, all the officers and soldiers of the Big Dipper army felt a massive pressure. The combined might of two Yusang Great Generals completely changed the nature of this battle. Rumble. Hooves began to rise, and after a few moments of silence, thousands of Tibetan horsemen began to pour down the edge of the plateau like a pot of dumplings being spilled. They swept toward Big Dipper City with a momentum that could stun the heavens and topple mountains. The atmosphere instantly grew incomparably tense. Boom! On the highest tower, Geshu Han suddenly took a step forward, his handsome and imposing face exuding a frigid and somber aura. Everyone, heed my orders. Stand ready. Geshu Han's right hand rested on his saber while an energy as vast as the mountains and the seas, as frenzied as a storm, surged into the sky. At almost the same moment, the army roared, the 60,000 elites of the Big Dipper army exploding with a murderous intent that broke through the firmament. The battle had finally begun. The long-disappeared Yusang King of Generals Witadra Konglo had appeared with Dusong Mangpoj to attack Longxi's Big Dipper City. The arrival of this news stunned the capital. And even more stunning was the news from the southwest. Xinyu Zhongtong had been defeated. His 180,000 soldiers dealt a crushing defeat by a pincer attack from Mengshi Zhao and Yusang. More than half had been killed, and even the 60,000 reinforcements under Li Jingyi had been intercepted by Yusang. The spread of this news sent the capital into consternation and the court into panic. News had begun to spread a few days ago. A scout from Li Jingyi's army had rushed into the capital, covered in blood. Upon being carried to the Bureau of Military Personnel, he delivered his message, a request for reinforcements, and then fell unconscious. If the large-scale Tibetan assault on the Longxi border was shocking, the grievous news that the 180,000 elites of Jiannan had lost was even more earth-shattering. No one had expected such a thing. The Tibetan assault made everyone panic. The Tibetans are declaring war against the Great Tang. This is a complete break. In the imperial court, an imperial censor shouted for all he was worth, his face red, his entire body shaking from the sheer rage flowing through him. It's already collapsed. In Longxi and the southwest, Yusang has mobilized over 100,000 soldiers to invade the Great Tang. If that's not a break, what is? Right now we have to talk about what to do next. Li Jingyi has already been defeated. Where else can we get soldiers? If we want to help out Xinyu Zhongtong and Li Jingyi, the Big Dipper army is the best way. But the Big Dipper army is being held down by Witadra Konglo and Dusong Mangpoj. Lord Wang said a long time ago that this wasn't the time to send soldiers. But none of you listened. Now you know. That's not what I'm worried about right now. What of the hundreds of thousands of civilians living in the southwest? If the 180,000 elites of the Annan Protectorate aren't there to stand guard, the southwest is a completely open field. Who else is left that can stop the combined armies of Mengshi Zhao and Yusang? Bzzzt. As if all the air had been suddenly sucked out of the room, the noisy hall fell quiet. All the nobles and officials had stopped talking. A stifling mood shrouded the entire court. The defeat of the southwest had never been their greatest worry. Their true concern was the almost 1 million civilians living in the southwest. As the barrier of the southwest, the Annan Protectorate was the first and final wall against Mengshi Zhao and Yusang. It was for this reason that the Annan Protectorate had always had a very large garrison. 180,000 elites far surpassed the number of troops in Geshu Han's Big Dipper army or in Gao Xinji's army. Not even the Anong Protectorate's Zhang Shogui had 180,000 soldiers. And it was for this reason that when Zhangqiu Jianxiong had been presiding over the southwest, he had always been prudent and cautious, never once daring to take the initiative and start an offensive. However, Zheliuofeng's sudden attack and Zhangqiu Jianxiong's lack of stability in his new post of Minister of War had caused him to succumb to the pressure. Voiding his old concerns, the imperial court would need at least 2 months to raise a new wave of reinforcements. This time would be necessary whether they transferred these soldiers from the other protectorates or recruited them now. But right now, the almost 1 million inhabitants of the southwest were bereft of protection. When they thought about what would happen when Meng Shizhao and Yusang advanced, all the ministers trembled in fear. Wang Chong, as King Song looked at the worried yet silent faces of the gathered officials, he suddenly thought of that boy. No one had expected the 180,000 elites of the Southwest to end up in this state. If there was someone who had already predicted all of this, that person was undoubtedly Wang Chong. For some reason, King Song felt like Wang Chong had always known that this was how things would develop. This made him feel rather strange. Perhaps this child has some idea of how to proceed, King Song thought to himself, raising his head up to the carved image of the coiled dragon on the roof of the hall. A roof would leak on the night of a downpour. When the imperial court of the Central Plains was still stunned by defeat in the southwest, the Great Tangs north and northeast were also growing restless. Ha ha ha! This is a gift from the heavens. I didn't think that 180,000 Great Tang elites would actually lose to Yusang and Meng Shizhao. On a moonlight night, on the vast steppe to the north of the Yin Mountains, a white tent loomed. The tent was surrounded by massive white wolves, almost lion-like. They warily watched the surroundings with fierce expressions. Within the tent, oil lanterns cast a pitch-black shadow onto the canvas, magnifying it to gigantic proportions. Although the source of this shadow used no techniques, displayed no martial arts, the shadow exuded a dreadful aura. Like a bottomless abyss, it sucked in all the moonlight in a radius of several hundred zhang. Carry out my order. The army will move south and enter a stalemate with the Great Tang's biting protectorate. If the biting protectorate shows any strange movements, we will move south and completely overthrow them. Clenching his fist, that shadow spoke with a rough and determined voice. But Kagan, won't we be utterly offending the Tang Emperor? In the flickering light of the tent, another voice within the tent urged caution, his fear evident. Ha, you think that the Great Tang is still the Great Tang of the past? 180,000 elites. That's 180,000 elites. The Great Tang of the past wouldn't have been guaranteed to lose even if Yusang and Meng Shizhao used all their power. That rough voice spoke, seeming to drift off at the end as its owner began to remember the past. The power of the Great Tang was not something any ordinary person could imagine. When war god Su Zhengchen was still present and the Eastern and Western Turks were still strong, Kagan Osmishwan was still a child. 150,000 fully equipped warriors and the most valiant Black Wolf Kagan II of the Western Turks couldn't even stop the 8,000 soldiers under Su Zhengchen. Afterward, the Eastern and Western Turks were left greatly weakened, with both Wang Jiuling and Wang Zhongxi sweeping through them. It was only after a long time that they finally recovered. The 600,000 to 700,000 Great Tang soldiers were able to suppress the surrounding foreign kingdoms due to their oppressive strength and various weapons. But now, 180,000 Great Tang elites and 60,000 reinforcements had been completely routed by Meng Shizhao and Yusang. To the Western Turks and the other empires, this was something that they didn't even dare to imagine in the past. The Great Tang has already become brittle and is no longer as powerful as it once was. They've had it far too easy for too long. And we have also changed. The rough voice suddenly became incomparably loud. The pack of white wolves around the tent seemed to sense something and began to bare their teeth. Let's go. The Turks and the Great Tang will fight with each other. If not now, then it will be in the future. Yes, your subordinate understands. At the same time, to the east of Yuzhou and north of the Bohai Sea, a towering wall stood opposite the distant Anong Protectorate, separated from it by a vast plain and a clear river. The walls were scorched by flames and appeared to have experienced countless battles. Yet they were so lofty and firm that not even the walls of the Central Plains could compare. Geimu City 3. On the banner flapping over the massive city walls were actually these words written in Han characters. Goguryeo bordered the central plains, and though their spoken languages differed, Goguryeo still used the Han characters of the central plains in their official records. Boom! Suddenly, the normally shut gates of Geimu City opened and Gogurian infantry suddenly surged out. At almost the same time, the gates to the north and south of the city also opened to let large numbers of Gogurian soldiers out. This sudden activity shocked the entire territory of Yuzhou. All the soldiers of the Anong Protectorate were dumbstruck. The Anong Protectorate governed the lands to the east of Yuzhou. This was no nominal authority, but one obtained through fire and blood, forged through the course of several wars. The Empire of Goguryeo had always taken a defensive stance in the northeast, relying on its firm city walls and other fortifications to defend against the Great Tang's attacks. Never once had it opened its gates to launch an offensive. Enemy! On the other side of the clear river, several Great Tang scouts jumped onto their horses as they yelled and galloped away. They did not see the stalwart figure of a Gogurian great general appearing on the walls of Geimu City, 5 long sabers on his back, quietly watching them with a complicated gaze. In his hand was a royal Gogurian decree on yellow paper. The moon in water, symbol on the decree clearly conveying its sender. This was a decree from the Emperor of Goguryeo, Yun Geisaman. Vigorously attack. Suppress the Great Tang. This royal decree had only these 6 words. In the space of a single night, the countries bordering the Great Tang, the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates, the Goguryeo Empire, and even the distant Abbasid Caliphate were beginning to show signs of movement. The entirety of the Great Tang was in panic. Only Wang Chong had expected all this to happen and remained calm and indifferent throughout. Everything has returned to the starting point. While the winds howled overhead, Wang Chong stood at the peak of Deflecting Blade Mountain, his heart incomparably calm. The defeat in the southwest, the interception of the reinforcements, the restlessness of the surrounding foreign countries. Everything was exactly like what had happened in his last life, when consternation and panic engulfed all of the Great Tang. Only Wang Chong was calm, having anticipated everything. Young master, the training is finished. What should be done next? A familiar voice came from behind him as Zhao Jingdian galloped on a horse toward him. At almost the same time, there was a rumble as hundreds of horsemen charged down the mountain, a crushing momentum exploding from their bodies. Wang Chong watched these swift figures until they vanished into the distance. If one didn't know the truth, it would be very hard to believe that these incredibly fierce horsemen were actually the true martial realm experts that Wang Chong had recruited from the various clans. These people had come from different clans, practiced different techniques, and had different temperaments, but at this moment, they were beginning to show signs of an army. Only with Li Sai's power suppressing from above and Zhao Jingdian's ability to organize troops could this sort of army be formed in such a short amount of time. Although he had still not reached the proficiency from his last life, Zhao Jingdian was already beginning to display that talent for command that had made him Wang Chong's trusted aide. It's about time. Proceed with the second phase of training. Wang Chong took out a long-prepared diagram from his sleeve and gave it to Zhao Jingdian. These true martial realm experts hired by the clans were still far from reaching the level of discipline, obedience, and flexibility that he wanted. He wasn't able to command them like they were his arms and fingers, but as long as they could learn the 2 formations he had given them, it would be enough. The rest would have to be trained on the march, and this follow-up training was probably not something Zhao Jingdian could do. He would have to personally supervise it. Yes, young master. Zhao Jingdian lowered his head without hesitation and quickly went to carry out his new orders. Gallop! Zhao Jingdian's horse left a trail of dust as it hurried away to catch up with the 1,000 horsemen. He began to issue order after order, and with these orders the horsemen began to shift, their movements causing even more dust to rise. I didn't think that you really would be training them. A sigh suddenly came from behind Wang Chong, as well as a voice tinged with an indescribably complex mixture of emotions. Wang Chong's body shivered as he turned his head. It was a familiar figure, broad-shouldered and sturdy, dressed in a yellow dragon robe. He was slowly walking up from the mountain slope, his every moment imbued with a noble aura. And behind him was the old butler, silently following behind him like a ghost. "Young master, I'm sorry. His Highness King Song didn't permit me to inform you." Nearby, Wei Onfong had his head lowered and his arms drooped, shame all over his face. Wang Chong's face went from surprise to a frown, but he quickly regained his composure. King Song and his old butler shouldn't have been able to get so close without him noticing. But when he thought about that old butler's unfathomable strength and King Song's own power, Wang Chong felt somewhat pacified. Although he himself had grown much stronger, he was still very far from unfathomably powerful experts like King Song and the old butler. It was normal for him to not notice them as they ascended. "Has your Highness King Song come because of Yusang and Meng Shizhao?" Wang Chong indifferently asked, as if he had already expected King Song and the old butler to appear. "You already anticipated this situation, correct?" With a solemn face, far less relaxed than Wang Chong's, King Song went straight to the point. The matter of Yusang, Meng Shizhao, and Wang Chong had perplexed him for quite some time now. Completely based on his intuition, King Song felt that Wang Chong knew something, so he had come here. On the Longxi, Huitadra Konglo and Dusong Mangpoj appeared at the same time, leading an army to attack Big Dipper City and restrain Gashu Han. "You already knew about this, correct?" King Song said. Wars between countries were no trifling matter, but he was using this military intelligence to question a teenager. This was the conduct of a madman, but King Song was set on this course. If he could not clarify these matters, he would never be at peace, would never get a good night's sleep. To the northeast, the northwest, and around Baiting, all the foreign countries were restless, intentionally or unintentionally holding down the Great Tang's forces. This situation was unprecedented. Although no one in the imperial court had noticed it yet, King Song was already feeling a terrible danger. It was not so long ago that the foreign countries all feared and respected the Great Tang, keeping far away from its armies. When did they become so bold and reckless? King Song felt an unprecedented peril in these abnormalities. If the foreign countries no longer respected the Great Tang and perhaps had even silently agreed to work together and restrain the Great Tang, how could the Great Tang continue to subdue them all and sit steady in the center? The Great Tang had used decades, perhaps even over 100 years, to subdue these foreign countries and create the current golden age of peace. But if this all fell apart, if they lost their fear, wouldn't the Central Plains once more become the target for all the various foreign powers? A momentary loss could be recovered from, but if this tacit understanding for peace was broken, what awaited the Great Tang would be an unending sequence of wars, danger lurking around every corner. The current Great Tang was far from its peak of power. The long peace had softened the hearts of the people, but the foreign countries, once naught but powder under the hooves of the Great Tang's cavalry, targets for their crossbows, had benefited from the Great Tang's peace. The long period of trade had allowed them to obtain large amounts of refined iron, pig iron, cast iron, and steel, with which they could forge a large amount of weapons. They were now far stronger than they were in the past. While one receded, the others swelled. King Song couldn't help but worry about such problems. The war in the southwest might only be the beginning. The Great Tang could soon be facing an endless storm. If there was no skin, what would the fur attach to? If such a thing happened, perhaps no one would be able to survive. Yes, Wang Chong immediately and frankly admitted to King Song's question. Warning? Warning? The voice from the Stone of Destiny rang out in his mind, but Wang Chong acted like he couldn't hear, his gaze fixed on King Song. At this moment, King Song was dumbfounded. Although King Song had this intense feeling ever since he had left the court, Wang Chong's frank confession had still caught King Song completely off guard. King Song looked at Wang Chong in astonishment, his mind in a complete mess, unable to describe what he was feeling. The south, Xianxia, Longxi's border, not a single person in the court could have predicted the incidents taking place there, including himself. If someone had said beforehand that they had already predicted all of this, King Song would have called them crazy. But as for Wang Chong, King Song believed him. After a long period of silence, King Song finally asked, "Just how did you know?" There were far too many secrets hanging around Wang Chong. Although King Song had experienced countless trials and political storms, developing an extremely sharp gaze and feel for politics, King Song still found it at times impossible to see through this teenager standing before him. Wang Chong shook his head and casually said, "This isn't some big secret." Although he was a reincarnator and possessed an entire life's worth of memories, some things could be predicted even without foresight. Mengshi Zhao, Yusang, Goguryeo, the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates. These empires had grown stronger and stronger over the years, while the Great Tang had remained in the same place. No, it had not just remained in the same place. In reality, it was constantly declining. The imperial court from top to bottom and the whole of society had become haughty and lazy, and the wealth of the Central Plains was bound to stir the ambitions of these foreign countries. And among all these foreign kingdoms, Yusang had the fiercest conflicts with the Great Tang and had the greatest capacity to invade. Unlike the Eastern and Western Turkic Khaganates, Yusang was based on a high plateau. The Great Tang wanted to deal with this high-altitude empire, but it lacked the strength. Thus, in every war, the Tibetans only needed to retreat into their interior, a strategic withdrawal saving them from disaster. They had always possessed a safe fortress, and they recovered faster than the other foreign kingdoms. At the same time, if Yusang wanted to expand, the Great Tang in the Central Plains was the greatest barrier. Everything foreordained Yusang to always be the first opponent to strike a blow. Zheluofeng and his 300,000 Mengshi Zhao soldiers had been their chance. They had already routed Xinyu Zhongtong in the southwest, and if they wanted to amplify their success, they needed to prevent any reinforcements from the Great Tang. Consequently, it was imperative that they send an army to restrain Geshu Han and his Big Dipper army. Thus, Wang Chong was utterly unsurprised to see such a thing happen. Although Yusang was a foreign kingdom outside the sphere of Han civilization and was far less prosperous than the Central Plains, there were several extremely powerful existences behind it. Whether it was Daluan Ruozhen, Huashu Huaitsong, Huitadra Konglo, or Dusong Mangpoj, they were all the elite of the elite, not one bit inferior to the renowned generals of the Central Plains. When these generals joined their powers, there would be no flaw in their strategies. Even though Wang Chong knew far in advance, he still wasn't able to do anything about it. "Since you were able to analyze all this, why didn't you speak up sooner?" King Song looked at the youth, his heart caught up in a mixture of emotions. In the past, he would definitely have been full of praise for Wang Chong's analysis. But now there was defeat in the southwest, danger in Longxi, restlessness on the borders of the northeast, northwest, and biting. King Song no longer had the mind to think about much else. "If I said it, would anyone have believed me?" Wang Chong indifferently said. The campaign in the southwest had already reached this point. After 300 years, this massive and prosperous empire had finally welcomed its first life-threatening peril. And the perils that followed would only be more dangerous, more formidable. If they could not even endure through this one, the following series of events coming down like a line of dominoes would completely knock the empire over. At this moment, there was no need to hide anything. All that King Song could do upon hearing Wang Chong's question was to raise his head up to the dark clouds and give a long sigh. Wang Chong was correct. Military affairs were no trifling matter. Even if Wang Chong personally told him what would happen, even with his relationship with multiple generations of the Wang clan, he would never have believed Wang Chong's words. It wasn't about whether he trusted Wang Chong. This just wasn't how major affairs in the imperial court were decided. Private affections were not to play any part in the proceedings. Without solid evidence, no one would allow a few lines of analysis to decide matters of state, decide the lives of tens of thousands, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This was not the correct way to run a government. Thus, no matter what Wang Chong said, no one would believe until it actually happened, not even King Song. It was precisely because he understood this that King Song couldn't help but sigh, a deep helplessness welling up in his heart. With Li Zhengyi's defeat, the Great Tang had no more extra soldiers to offer. Could all this really be unavoidable? At this moment, King Song's mind was agitated and in turmoil. "Your Highness, we cannot avoid what has already happened. The greatest concern right now is how to handle the war in the southwest. Wang Chong sternly replied. No matter how terrible things were, as long as the dust hadn't yet settled, he would not give up. What else can be done? The Southwest has already been lost. Your 1,000 men are like a cup of water on a cart of burning firewood. They won't be able to do anything. King Song bitterly smiled as his gaze shifted toward the roiling dust rising from another mountain. He understood everything now, understood the moment he had arrived at this place. Wang Chong had sold off the spirit vein so that he could gather the experts of the great clans and set off for the Southwest. Only the dangerous situation in the Southwest was worth Wang Chong's gathering so many experts and paying such a heavy price. But all of this was a drop in the ocean. What could 1,000 soldiers do, even if they were experts from the great clans of the capital? A war was not something a mere 1,000 experts could resolve. War was far from being that simple. If I don't try, how do I know whether I can succeed? Wang Chong asked back, his expression firm. With the war in the Southwest at this stage, he had no other methods. Although 1,000 experts was not a lot, this was all he could do on short notice, and he had invested everything he could. How can I help you? King Song sternly said. Your Highness, if everything goes as expected, in at most 7 days, I will be leaving. I don't have any rank or title, so I won't be able to make the generals over there submit. I require your Highness's token so that my orders are followed without fail. In addition, if possible, it would be great if your Highness could lend me a few of your experts, Wang Chong said. King Song nodded and handed over his token. Then he and his old butler silently left. Wang Chong watched King Song leave, and though his eyes flickered with emotion for a few moments, he quickly went back to normal. The danger in the Southwest grew with every passing moment. He didn't have much time left, and he needed to efficiently use every moment of it. Bree! A neigh reverberated through the mountains as hooves thundered. In a flash, a horse shot out of the forest like a dragon. After several months, the white-hoofed shadow had grown even stronger and sturdier. Whether it was its bones, ligaments, or muscles, the white-hoofed shadow was now a completely mature adult, the difference from its former self as stark as night and day. Hiya! Wang Chong mounted the horse, took the reins, and gripped the flanks of the horse with his legs. He became one with the horse and left behind a trail of dust as he galloped off to the smithy of the Zhang clan. Ding-dang! Ding-dang! To the west of the capital loomed a giant smithy. From a distance, Wang Chong could already hear the sounds of hammering and see the plumes of smoke. Young master! Upon seeing Wang Chong, a supervisor from the Zhang clan hurried to welcome him. At the moment, there was no one in the Zhang clan who didn't recognize Wang Chong. Let me go in and take a look. Wang Chong dismounted and got straight to the point. The smithy of the Zhang clan was a hive of activity, generating smoke everywhere and incessant sounds of hammering. Upon walking in, Wang Chong could feel intense waves of heat slapping against his face. Young master, following your orders. All the master smiths of the clan worked day and night to forge the wood steel swords you required. The clan viewed this task with utmost importance, and the clan head personally supervised the entire process. He just left a few moments ago. If you had come a little earlier, you would have been able to meet him, the Zhang clan's supervisor explained. It had been a very long time since the Zhang clan's smithy had been this busy. All of its master smiths had come forward, and these last few days had been even more busy than the last few months. Wang Chong nodded. The matter of the wood steel swords was incredibly important. With a sweep of his gaze, Wang Chong could see that many guards were standing sentinel, including the Wang clan experts that had been dispatched to this place. Such was the value of the wood steel swords that many people were willing to go to desperate lengths to obtain one. Wang Chong, why are you here? As the supervisor was speaking, another voice butted in. Zhang Tsong and Zhang Jian were leading several elders of the Zhang clan to receive Wang Chong. Wang Chong nodded in greeting and asked, "How is the forging of the wood steel swords going?" "It'll be finished in another 3 days, but we'll have to rely on you for the next step." Zhang Tsong looked worriedly at Wang Chong. 1,000 wood steel swords required many steps. Even a great clan like the Zhang clan had felt it very exhausting, and Wang Chong had to finish them all by himself. Zhang Tsong was concerned that Wang Chong wouldn't be able to do it alone. I know. All you need to do is finish with the initial processing for the 1,000 Wuxia steel swords. None of you have to worry about the rest, Wang Chong calmly said. The crucial steps for forging the Wuxia steel swords rested almost entirely in his hand, and no one could copy them. However, though the process overall was complex, the last steps were actually very simple. As long as enough liquid was prepared, the temperature of the Wuxia steel swords could be lowered fairly quickly. In any case, he had it much easier than the Zhang clan. In addition, we've already passed the matter of the armor to the other clans for them to work. We've dispatched supervisors to oversee the process. The armors might be finished before the Wuxia steel swords, Zhang Jian added. There were too many steps in forging the Wuxia steel swords, making the work rather troublesome. In comparison, the meteoric metal armor was much simpler. Wang Chong did not intend to forge armor made of pure meteoric metal, but instead wanted to mix the meteoric metal with other high-class refined iron. This made the forging much easier and also allowed for more suits of armor to be produced. And unlike the Wuxia steel swords, the various clans were all more experienced in forging armor. The only problem was that meteoric metal had a higher melting point. Otherwise, the process would have been even faster. In the center of the smithy was a massive, windowless room. Its walls were made from iron and were 3 feet thick. Each of the walls had been inscribed with layers of defensive inscriptions that made them extremely sturdy. This was where the Zhang clan stored its weapons. Wang Chong's Wuxia steel swords were stored inside. Wang Chong walked in, picked a Wuxia steel sword embryo out of the pile, and began to carefully inspect it. The safe house had no windows, but it did have several bright pearls embedded in the ceiling to give light. The warm light of these pearls allowed him to see the fluid lines on the Wuxia steel sword. Although it still had not gone through the quenching and the last few steps, the sword embryo itself was already very aesthetically pleasing. The smiths of the Zhang clan truly are excellent. Though Wang Chong said nothing as he examined the sword embryo, he mentally gave his nod of approval. 1,000 Wuxia steel swords was no minor affair, and he had even required that they be forged in a very short amount of time. His greatest concern was that the Zhang clan might skimp on their work. But his inspection revealed that the Zhang clan truly had treated this matter seriously. Each of the sword embryos he inspected had gone through countless temperings and taken a great deal of effort to create. The Zhang clan smiths had cherished this precious forging material far more than Wang Chong had imagined. After examining them all, Wang Chong began to get a feel for their weight. Finally, he nodded his head. Not bad. These Wuxia steel sword embryos felt heavy in his hand, indicating that they were all pure Wuxia steel. Every Wuxia steel sword had to pass through his hands, so he was extremely familiar with the weight of Wuxia steel. Wuxia steel could not be mixed with other metals. Otherwise, the weapon would be ruined. Send these weapons over to my side. And send the rest over once you finish them, Wang Chong said as he put down a sword embryo. Wang Chong now felt completely at ease about leaving this matter to the Zhang clan. After leaving the Zhang clan smithy, Wang Chong rode to the cave outside the city. It didn't take long before a stream of Wuxia steel sword embryos began to be delivered into the cave. As time slowly passed, Wang Chong completely forgot about the outside world, as all of his focus was placed on forging the Wuxia steel swords. Batch after batch of Wuxia steel swords passed through Wang Chong's hands and out of the cave. They were sent to Deflecting Blade Mountain, where they were placed together with the meteoric metal armor forged by the other clans and distributed to the true martial realm experts recruited from the great clans. Quality and not quantity was more important in a soldier. Through these armaments, the 1,000-man division of elite soldiers that Wang Chong anticipated was slowly beginning to take shape. Time was short, and while Wang Chong was completely cut off from the outside world, his entire being focused on forging Wuxia steel swords, the outside world was being overturned. The war in the southwest had shaken the entire empire, troubling the minds of millions. Every day, more news was coming from the southwest. More and more details began to be revealed about the defeat in the southwest, and the more that was known, the more troubled the people were. And several days later, a letter arrived from the front lines, jolting the entire capital. More than half a month after Shen Yuzhongtong set off with his 180,000 elites, the imperial court finally received a letter from Xianxia. This was a letter requesting reinforcements. The letter said that the supplies in Lion City wouldn't be able to last for too long and would be exhausted after a little more time, and so the imperial court was being asked to speedily deliver supplies. Xianxia seal had been stamped at the end. This letter let the people know for the first time that 80,000 soldiers from the Anan Protectorate still remained out of the initial 180,000, and that this army was taking shelter in a place called Lion City. After many days and nights of worry, this news was assuredly a great comfort. But people quickly began to ask, what was Lion City? Where was that place? How could it block the assaults from the hundreds and thousands of soldiers from Meng Shizhao and Yusang? Countless questions surged through their minds. The officials from the Bureau of Revenue and the Bureau of Personnel were quickly summoned to the imperial court to be questioned about this Lion City. But to the astonishment of all, none of the officials knew anything about this Lion City. They even had to ask where it was. Even stranger was that this Lion City was found on no maps of the Great Tang. Even those old ministers of the court who had lived in the southwest for decades and knew Jiannan like the back of their hand had no idea what this Lion City was or where it was located. So surprising was this conclusion that no one dared to believe it. A large number of scouts were immediately dispatched to the southwest. No one dared to overlook the lives of these 80,000 elites. Everyone knew that these 80,000 soldiers were the last barrier to the southwest. Their presence could hold down those two foreign powers and make them act more cautiously. Without them, Meng Shizhao and Yusang would have nothing to fear. Zheluofeng, Daluan Ruozhen, and Huashu Huaizong would lead their armies deep into Tang territory, sweeping over the southwest until the borders of Longxi. But just when everyone was fruitlessly seeking clues on this Lion City, a surprising response came from a minor official in the Bureau of Military Personnel, serving under Zhangqiu Jianxiong. He suddenly remembered that when Zhangqiu Jianxiong was holding a banquet in the capital, he had invited Wang Zhen and his nephew. At that banquet, Wang Chong had mentioned that he wanted to set up a city in the southwest. And later on, a person at Wang Chong's side had come to consult the minor official on this matter. At the time, that person seemed to vaguely indicate that this city was being established at Lion Mountain. Everyone was flabbergasted at this news. And then they received further confirmation that more than half a year ago, the Wang clan really had dispatched a large number of guards to the southwest, along with a large amount of raw materials. Wang Chong had also sent 1,000,000 taels of gold to the southwest. All levels of society, from the court down to the common man, were left dumbfounded. The impact this made on all the officials of the court was difficult to imagine. Even Wang Chong's big uncle, Wang Zhen, was stunned speechless. He knew that Wang Chong had asked for a lot of land from Zhangqiu Jianxiong. In fact, he had been sitting at the table at the time. But not even Wang Zhen knew that this Lion City that occupied a strategic location in the Southwest War had been constructed by Wang Chong, and more than half a year ago at that. Even the slowest of people were beginning to realize something. Had that young fellow from the Wang clan already predicted this war more than half a year ago, and even constructed that important and strategic city to prepare for it? Countless people found this nigh impossible to believe. Crazy. That's completely crazy. How could he know that the Great Tang and Meng Shizhao would fight there? Impossible. Only a fool would build a city for the sake of a war. And how could he know that Meng Shizhao and the Great Tang would battle there? How much profit can the T-Horse Road bring? If not for war, was it for trade? Would you build a city for the sake of trade, investing 1,000,000 taels of gold? The person was dumbstruck. That this war that involved 180,000 Great Tang elites, 300,000 Meng Shizhao soldiers, and almost 1,000,000 civilians had been decided by a single teenage scion in the capital was truly difficult to believe. In fact, it was completely absurd. Regardless of the truth, whether it was for trade or war, Wang Chong and that Lion City several thousand li away had garnered the attention of all the officials and military officers. The Wang clan began to receive letter after letter, and the imperial court even sent a document of inquiry to Wang Chong. But at this time, Wang Chong couldn't be bothered to get into a debate in the imperial court. After finishing off the last Wut's steel sword, Wang Chong finally emerged from the cave. But he ignored the summons from the imperial court, boarding his carriage for elsewhere. His destination was not the Wang clan residence. Instead, the carriage turned at Vermilion Bird Street and headed toward the office of the Minister of War. He was greeted by a large board painted black, with the words Minister of War written on it in large letters. This was Xianxia Jianxiong's new place of work. From the moment he took the position, Xianxia Jianxiong had replaced everyone in the Minister of War's office with his own group of people from the southwest. Through this method, Xianxia Jianxiong had placed the entirety of the office under his firm control. But when Wang Chong arrived, the entire office was blanketed in a somber and heavy mood. Anyone who passed by would be able to feel that melancholy and oppressive air. Almost everyone in the Minister of War's office had their heads lowered. Xianxia Jianxiong had originally been the Protector General for the Southwest, and the current defeat in the Southwest had resulted in the deaths of 100,000 of the 180,000 elites and the imminent massacre of almost 1 million civilians at the hands of Meng Shizhao and Yusang. One could easily imagine the pressure these officers from the Southwest were facing. Although no one had said anything, as they were former officers of the Annan Protectorate, all the blame for this affair rested on them. At present, there was almost no one in the Minister of War's office who didn't recognize Wang Chong. Although no one knew his purpose, when Wang Chong appeared at the gate, he was quickly ushered in. In the innermost confines of the Minister of War's office, Wang Chong saw the downtrodden figure of Xianxia Jianxiong, so haggard that it seemed like he had suffered through some terrible torture. "My lord!" Wang Chong tidied his clothes, walked in, and bowed. "You've come." Xianxia Jianxiong's eyes momentarily lit up at the sight of Wang Chong, but they hurriedly dimmed as he lowered his head once more in dejection. Given the Wang clan's status and the relationship Wang Chong had with Yang Zhao and consort Taizhen, Xianxia Jianxiong should have greeted him with warm enthusiasm, but he truly was not in the mood, nor was this a good time to receive guests. All of society was currently focused on the Southwest, apparently allowing Xianxia Jianxiong to escape any disaster for now. But in reality, only Xianxia Jianxiong knew that all the pressure and criticism was actually gathering on his body. In the most recent morning court sessions, he had even felt the occasional unkind gaze from the other prestigious officials. Xianxia Jianxiong understood what all these officials were thinking. If you hadn't been so set on entering the capital, the Southwest would have never turned out this way. Moreover, you might be the Minister of War now and, in the strictest sense of the word, unrelated to the matter of the Southwest. But Xinyu Zhongtong was someone that you recommended, and the Southwest was your territory. Now 100,000 Great Tang elites have died and Li Zhengyi's reinforcements were ambushed. This was all because you recommended the wrong person. You carry unavoidable blame in this catastrophe. This invisible pressure could push anyone to the breaking point, and even more concerningly, Xianxia Jianxiong himself believed that this was his mistake. In the current situation, he probably wouldn't even be able to hold onto his position of Minister of War, and with the loss of his territory in the Southwest, he would also probably lose the right to stand in court. Plagued by problems both internal and external, Xianxia Jianxiong was mentally exhausted, lacking even the energy to greet Wang Chong. "My lord is troubled over the Southwest?" Wang Chong calmly asked as he seated himself across from Xianxia Jianxiong. "Ha. Other than that, what else could it be?" Xianxia Jianxiong replied with a bitter smile. In his view, Wang Chong's question was completely unnecessary. Even an idiot could probably understood how poor his situation was. Meng Shizhao and Yusang had unexpectedly joined forces. In the past, even if he were beaten to death, he wouldn't have dared to believe such a thing. But all of this had really happened. He had barely left and Daluan Ruozhen and Huashu Huaizong were already holding his feet to the fire. It seemed like he wouldn't be Minister of War for very long. Since my lord is worried about this matter, why not leave the Bureau of Military Personnel and lead an army to the Southwest? Wang Chong said. "Leave? I'm the Minister of War. I have to supervise the matters of the Imperial Court. How can I just leave and participate in a war on the front lines? In the 300 years since the founding of the Great Tang, have you ever heard of a Minister of War who went to fight a war on the front lines?" Xianxia Jianxiong said. In his view, Wang Chong's advice was a complete joke. If he went in his capacity as Minister of War to lead a charge through the front lines, who would handle the Minister of War's affairs? A snake had a snake path and a mouse had a mouse path, but both were completely different from each other. While it's true that the rules of the court cannot be discarded, if Milord forces the issue, which official would dare to stop you? The entire empire is currently focused on the southwest. As long as Milord can resolve the southwest, who would dare to criticize you? Wang Chong said. Xianxia Jianxiong's eyes unfocused for a few moments. If he could solve the war in the southwest by leaving the capital, why wouldn't he? But now, if he had gone before the Great Tang had been routed, it would have been fine, but now, even if he went, what use would it be? I can't. Wang Chong, you don't understand. The rules of the court cannot be broken. As Minister of War, I cannot leave the capital. Xianxia Jianxiong struggled for a few moments, but only a few, before regaining his composure. Defeat in the southwest was already unavoidable. He had finally managed to climb up to his current position, and with so many people watching, he could not allow it to be lost. The Anan Protectorate already had nothing to do with him, but he could at least attempt to hold the position of Minister of War. Ah! Wang Chong had been keeping a close watch on the changes in Xianxia Jianxiong's face. As he watched it slowly turn hard, he couldn't help but give a long sigh. Xianxia Jianxiong knew the southwest like the back of his palm, as well as Zheluofeng, Daluan Ruozhen, and Huashu Huizong. He even knew their commanding style. The southwest would be much easier to resolve if he had the previous Anan Protector General at his side, increasing his chances of ending the war. But his final attempt had failed. The current Xianxia Jianxiong was no longer the Xianxia Jianxiong of the past. His desire for power had completely defeated his status as an imperial great general. He was no longer that tiger of the empire. Wang Chong felt somewhat disappointed, but also a little relieved. In the end, he could only rely on himself. Milord, I came this time to bid you farewell, Wang Chong said forthrightly, clasping his hands in respect. Since he could no longer place his hopes on the Minister of War, Wang Chong no longer hesitated. Ah! Xianxia Jianxiong gave a soft yelp, his body trembling as he raised his head to look at Wang Chong with shock on his face. You want to leave the capital? Yes. Wang Chong lightly continued. Wang Chong has already gathered 1,000 elites, set to leave for the southwest before the sun sets. Wang Chong spoke flatly and calmly, without emotion in his voice. The room was quiet, but the mood seemed to have slightly changed. Xianxia Jianxiong stared blankly at the youth before him. In his daze, he suddenly realized something, and he began to look at this youth with completely different eyes. He already had a keen understanding of what was happening in the southwest. For Wang Chong to go there at this time could only mean one thing. For the first time, Xianxia Jianxiong viewed Wang Chong with a sliver of respect in his eyes. He had heard many things about Wang Chong, heard much about the reputation of the Wang clan's Qilin son. But the feeling this time was completely different. Xianxia Jianxiong's mouth opened to instinctively stop him, but he ultimately chose not to. The situation in the southwest was extremely dangerous, but like a drowning man, he would take any chance, no matter how slim. What do you need? Xianxia Jianxiong asked, his eyes quickly turning clear. He was the previous Anan Protector General. Since Wang Chong was going to the southwest, he knew exactly what he needed to do. I require something in Milord's possession. If Milord believes in me, then I require Milord's token, one that can allow me command over the Anan Protectorate army, including Lord Xianyu, Wang Chong said. His expression was firm. Even when facing Xianxia Jianxiong, his eyes showed no fear. Xianxia Jianxiong felt like he had been jabbed, his pupils constricting and his expression turning extremely solemn. A Protector General was a border official. Even as Minister of War, he did not have complete control over them. Thus there was the saying, when the general is abroad, there are some orders they need not accept. But Wang Chong had guessed correctly. He truly did have a token that symbolized his own identity and was capable of commanding all 180,000 soldiers of the Anan Protectorate. This was also a method he had agreed to with Xianyu Zhongtong. If not for that token, he would not have left the southwest and given the position of Protector General to Shen Yuzhongtong. This matter was a great secret that only those in his inner circle knew. What is Milord still thinking about? Seeing the look on Zhangqiu Jianxiong's face and his unwillingness to speak, Wang Chong knew what he was thinking. The war in the southwest has already reached this stage. Does Milord still believe that there is another way? Wang Chong's voice had become a little louder. If Zhangqiu Jianxiong was still pinching pennies at this time, then he was letting down his title of Tiger of the Empire. Ah! Zhangqiu Jianxiong mentally struggled with himself, but after giving a long sigh, he finally made a decision. I hope that my decision won't be wrong. Clack! His right hand lightly pulled at his waist, bringing up a heavy medallion made from black metal. But Zhangqiu Jianxiong did not immediately hand it over. Answer a question for me first. Lion City in the southwest. Did you really anticipate all this? Yes. Zhangqiu Jianxiong gave a long sigh and handed over the token with no further questions. What else do you need me to do? If Milord is willing, give me a few of the generals at your side. With these words, Wang Chong left the Minister of War's office. After leaving, Wang Chong returned to Deflecting Blade Mountain. Soldiers raised for 1,000 days are meant to be used for a single moment. After so many days of training, it was finally time to head south. Rumble. At the peak of Deflecting Blade Mountain, the earth quaked and fierce winds swept through. With Zhao Jingdian leading the charge, 1,000 fully equipped experts rode their horses in an organized formation toward the mountain. Dust roiled as 1,000 hired experts followed like a crashing wave. Leading them was a giant man, 8 feet tall. He was extremely conspicuous, and on his back was a massive sword larger than the average man. Across all the Great Tang, probably only Li Sai possessed such an astonishing constitution. Rumbling could be heard as far as 100 li away. Even the students of Kunwu training camp were alarmed. But Wang Chong seemed to not see or hear. All his focus was on this army that he had raised. This mission to the southwest will be extremely dangerous. If you want to back out, there's still time. Wang Chong stood on the peak, his expression stern. His gaze was not on the experts from the great clans, but the ones that he had hired. The winds howled, but no noise came from those dense ranks. All of them appeared to not care about this danger. Hired experts had always lived life on the edge. If this career were peaceful and utterly without risk, wouldn't everyone be hired experts? Wang Chong's question was completely pointless for them. For hired experts, money was enough. The higher the risk, the greater the reward. As long as this requirement could be fulfilled, they really didn't care about much else. Humph! Wang Chong snorted. He gave no speech to raise the morale of the army. He simply drew his sword and pointed it at the sky. The unstoppable and peerlessly sharp wood steel sword exuded its cold light toward the dark clouds. Move out! With this earth-shaking order, Wang Chong mounted the white-hoofed shadow and led the army down Deflecting Blade Mountain, toward the southwest. The rumbling of the army, sweeping forward with the momentum of a mountain, followed him. All of the Great Tang Empire was focused on the imperial court and the southwest. Few noticed that the experts Wang Chong had gathered using millions of taels of gold and 1,000 wood steel swords had silently left the capital, riding toward the distant southwest. In the distant southwest, a massive lake, more than 80 li long and more than 10 li wide, spanned between the Great Tang and Mengshizhao. The lake was said to be connected to the sea, so it was called the Irai One. There was no one in the southwest that didn't know of Irai. All the merchants using the T-Horse Road had to pass through this place. This was a placid lake, a peaceful sea, but now it was brimming with the stench of death. Caw! Crows opened their wings and flocked over the Irai to a vast plain on its banks. Here were countless corpses, their pale faces turned toward the sky or the dirt, piled up and stretched out on the ground. There were people from the Great Tang here, from Mengshizhao and from Yusang, but the majority of them came from the Great Tang. The air stank of blood and the earth was dyed red. Birds dropped down from the sky to perch on these corpses, their long beaks pecking at eyes. From above, one could see that thousands of birds had gathered here. This tragic scene had become a dreadful and mournful feast for the crows. This was the battlefield of the Southwest. Broken axes, shattered halberds, and ragged banners scattered across the field served as the last scene of this battle. But though much time had passed, from a certain perspective, this battle still wasn't over. You're telling me that that city was constructed by a child? Daluan Ruozan stood on the gruesome battlefield, his gown as white as snow. He narrowed his deep eyes as he gazed at that majestic city of black steel in the distance, a hint of surprise on his face. Great Minister is correct. Our spies in the Great Tang have already discovered that this city was built by the youngest grandson of the Great Tang's former Prime Minister, Wang Jiling. Construction began on it a little more than half a year ago. Nearby, a bearded and middle-aged man of heroic constitution put his hands behind him and explained. This middle-aged man wore a silk dragon robe and had a muscular constitution, and his every movement exuded a thick aura of nobility. Even though he was standing next to prestigious figures like Daluan Ruozan and Huashu Huizong, he was not one bit inferior. Across all of Mengshizhao, the only person that could reach this level was the king of Mengshizhao, the strongest of his generation, Zheluofeng. Daluan Ruozan said nothing, but his eyes betrayed his astonishment. 300,000 Mengshizhao soldiers working with more than 200,000 Gari royal lineage heavy cavalry should have made it almost impossible for the 180,000 Great Tang elites to escape. But the reality was that this city near the banks of the Arai, an unremarkable city that still seemed to be in the middle of construction, had played a critical role in this battle. While 80,000 soldiers wasn't a large number, it also wasn't small. In normal circumstances, the massive might of their combined forces would have easily annihilated such a force. But the truth was that the firm walls of the city meant that the 80,000 soldiers had not only been able to stave off their assault. They also now occupied a rather decent position. The situation now was rather awkward. The door to the Great Tang's southwest was wide open, their 500,000-man army able to sweep in at any time. But this city near the plains of the Arai and the 80,000 soldiers within meant that this army of 500,000 soldiers couldn't go anywhere. This trifling lion city was like a peg that nailed down the Mengshizhao and Yusang armies. Although their numbers were far inferior to Yusang and Mengshizhao, the Great Tang still had the advantage in equipment. And the Great Tang soldiers also held the advantage in terms of crossbows, master archers, and other non-horse-based forces. If it weren't for their sheer strength in numbers, Mengshizhao would have never dared to challenge these 180,000 Great Tang elites. If they divided their troops poorly, those 80,000 soldiers could easily take advantage of this opportunity. After all, these 80,000 elites could still fight, could still influence this war. This matter is because of my carelessness. I received news when construction on this city began, but I didn't pay it much attention. I didn't think that this city would be built for war, or that it would hold enough supplies to sustain 80,000 soldiers. It now appears that this city was prepared long in advance, Zheluofeng said, a strange expression on his face. These were two leaders of their respective armies, one the king of Mengshizhao, the other the great minister of Yusang's Ngari royal lineage, yet they had been outwitted by a child in the Great Tang's capital several thousand li away. What was even harder to accept was that this child's actions clearly had nothing to do with the Great Tang imperial court. Otherwise, the Anan Protectorate's 180,000-man army would not have suffered such a grievous defeat, perhaps not have even mobilized. If that child really is as you say, then he can't be underestimated. When I return, I will advise the Tsenpo to investigate him and find out why he erected this city. I worry that this child might threaten Mengshizhao and our Yusang in the future, Daluan Ruozan said. He didn't know who this child called Wang Chong that Zheluofeng spoke of was, nor had he ever met him. But as a wise general who had to plan for the future, Daluan Ruozan had an instinctive distaste for variables like this, and he found the fact that he had no control over them even more unpleasant. There was no question that this city near the Arai and the distant Wangchong were complete beyond his control. However, he's too simple if he thinks that one city can stop us. Your most esteemed Majesty, how are the preparations going for the matter I spoke of? Daluan Ruozan grinned and turned to Zheluofeng. Although the city was a little troublesome, the problem wasn't intractable. Haha, relax. I've already mobilized all the subjects, the porters and farmers, of Mengshi and had them cut down the forest near Irai. In just 10 some days we'll have a large number of scaling ladders ready. When the time comes, the army will be able to assault the city and the Great Tang's defeat will be assured. Jelliofeng's eyes were bright as he stroked his beard and gave a hearty laugh. Humph, good. Then I'll wait for your good news. Those Tang soldiers can live for a little longer. Huashu Huaitsong have the army surround the city. Let no one escape. The Great Tang has no soldiers to send, so as long as we can wipe out the soldiers in Lion City, the entire southwest will be ours for the taking. The soldiers of our Yusang and Mengshi Zhao will be able to sweep across unhindered. With a wave of his sleeve, Daluan Ruozhen turned around to look at a large model. A finger shot out and stuck a flag at the place where Lion City was, then twisted, pulverizing the miniature Lion City into powder. Loudly laughing, Daluan Ruozhen turned and left for his own camp. And behind, 4 or 5 li from the Arai, within a lush forest, the tree branches were rustling as the sounds of chopping rang through the air. Thousands of Mengshi Zhao porters and farmers were at work. Singing a work song, they cut down tree after tree, and in the distance scaling ladders were under construction. Rumble. Hoofs thundered and dust roiled. An army of thousands traveled on the roads to the southwest, traveling night and day. Hiya! Wang Chong was in the front, horse whip in hand. Behind him were the 1,000 clan experts equipped with Wut's steel swords and meteoric metal armor, as well as several thousand hired experts. Several days had passed since they had left the capital, and they had been moving at maximum speed. 3 days and 3 nights was enough to cover several thousand li. This rapid advance was almost impossible to imagine. But even so, Wang Chong did not relax in the slightest. Warning: 112 Tang soldiers have died. The Annan Protectorate army is now below 80,000. Warning: 133 Tang soldiers have died. The Annan Protectorate army is rapidly weakening. User must act as quickly as possible. Warning: 253 Tang soldiers have died. Only 74,517 Tang soldiers remain in Lion City. Warning: Lion City's losses have now exceeded 500. 1 point of destiny energy will be subtracted from user as punishment. For every 500 deaths in Lion City, user will be deducted 1 point of destiny energy. Once 5,000 soldiers have been lost, every 500 deaths will result in a deduction of 2 points. At 30,000 deaths, every 500 deaths will result in a deduction of 3 points. If user has no destiny energy to pay the penalty, user will die. If user cannot reach the southwest battlefield in a month, user will die. Violating either of these will result in mission failure and death of user. The callous and emotionless voice of the Stone of Destiny continued to surge like a waterfall in Wang Chong's mind, each of its messages warning Wang Chong that his time was short. But Wang Chong had no mind to pay attention to these messages. All his thoughts were on the 80,000 soldiers in the southwest and the almost 1 million civilians that lived there. Only he himself understood just how little time he had. 20 days. Lion City's stockpile can only last for at most 20 more days. Once the supplies are exhausted, morale will collapse, and no matter how firm the walls of Lion City are, the city will still fall. Wang Chong's mind was as restless as the winds howling around him. That invisible pressure was pressing down on him at every moment, putting Wang Chong through an excruciating torment that no one else could ever experience. He had tarried for too long in the capital, but Wang Chong knew that there had been no other way. To do a good job, an artisan needed the best tools. If he wanted to intervene in a massive battlefield like the Southwest and rely on his own powers to influence this event that would shake the Great Tang and the Central Plains, he had to make ample preparations. Without that batch of Wut's steel swords, without the hardy meteoric metal armor, without those aids he had gathered, even if he brought even more people with him and arrived even sooner, his efforts against the 300,000 Mengshi Zhao troops and 200,000 Yusang troops would be like an ant shaking a tree, a grasshopper trying to stop a carriage. Quality, not quantity, was more important for soldiers. Wang Chong didn't have enough soldiers, so he could only work on quality. Consequently, when the war in the southwest broke out, Wang Chong did not hurriedly lead an army south, but used a considerable amount of time to forge equipment and train them. These things were necessary to enter the war, so this time was a necessary expense. Now that everything had been prepared, Wang Chong had to make up for as much of that time as he could. "How far is the next relay station?" Wang Chong asked without turning his head. "It's still 50 li. All the warhorses are prepared and can be switched out as soon as we get there." The screech of an eagle came from above. Old Eagle galloped alongside Wang Chong while receiving the eagle and reporting to Wang Chong. It was a long journey to the south, and no horse could endure this sort of non-stop march. But Wang Chong's army did not need to suffer this problem. The reason was very simple. While Wang Chong had been in the capital, preparing for his army to move out, the route that his army would take was also being prepared, along with the relay stations where they could rest. Everything on the road to the southwest had been made ready, leaving nothing that could delay them. A relay station had been set up every dozen li where Wang Chong could switch out warhorses. Every several dozen li, another batch of warhorses would be replaced, allowing him to maintain the fighting power and speed of his army at the maximum level. This was the ability to organize an army. Wang Chong's arrangements were so meticulous and comprehensive that no one had noticed them. There were currently very few people in the Great Tang army that could pull off such a feat in such a short amount of time. In his last life, Wang Chong had relied on this powerful organizational ability to lead his army across 100 li, 1,000 li. His forces were so agile that those foreign invaders had never been able to track him down. After passing through a few mountains, Wang Chong suddenly straightened his body, raised an arm and issued an order. "Crane wing formation. Rumble." The originally orderly army on the official road suddenly became chaotic, and a few of the warhorses even ran into each other. But this disorder persisted for only a short while. The several thousand soldiers quickly regained their composure and carried out the order. As they began to charge forward in formation, they exuded a strict discipline. They now seemed even more like an army than they had at Deflecting Blade Mountain. Wang Chong had at first given Li Sai and Zhao Jingdian the task of training the soldiers, but he himself personally carried out the last part of the training. One could imagine the effectiveness of someone who was known as War Saint in their last life personally training an army. In the 3 days of rapid advance from the capital, Wang Chong had not only succeeded in arranging this loose assortment of several thousand warriors into units of 100, 10, and 5. Wang Chong had also selected an officer for all these 100-man, 10-man, and 5-man units, allowing his orders to be delivered and executed to the very lowest level. Besides that, Wang Chong had, along with Zhao Jingdian and the others, taught the army a new set of cavalry formations, somewhat more complicated and more powerful. The current army was now equipped in standardized armor, and their cohesion had ascended to a completely new level. At the very least, it had taken on the basic shape of an army. After a few moments, Wang Chong raised his arm again. Arrow formation. The several thousand soldiers of this army quickly took another formation and began to exude a chilling killing intent. To train these undisciplined and rowdy warriors into this state in just 10 days was truly astonishing. But Li Sai, Zhao Jingdian, Old Eagle, and even the hired experts had already begun to naturally accept this and treat it as normal. Not even they had noticed how strange this was. Reporting. As the army was rapidly advancing and drilling, a shout came from a distant mountain as a warhorse rode over. The white-robed soldier riding it seemed to have been surveying the area and been waiting for a long time. Upon seeing Wang Chong's army, he had raised his horse whip and charged out of the lush forest. "Young master, your subordinate has carried out your orders and has been waiting here for 3 days. The items young master has ordered are ready. Please inspect them." The white-robed soldier galloped in front of the army, dismounted, and kneeled. Wang Chong's eyes glowed as he brought the army to a halt with the wave of his right hand. In an instant, the activity and movement came to a stop. This was the first time since the start of their march to the south that he had ordered the army to halt. At present, every second of time was precious. Wang Chong had particularly emphasized this while commanding this army. If it were not important, he wouldn't have the army stop. In just a moment, Li Sai, Zhao Jingdian, Luo Tong, and everyone else placed their focus on that white-robed soldier. Only Old Eagle seemed to understand. He looked forward with a calm expression, no surprise in his eyes.